Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Yirvi Shah, the executive editor of the Hechinger Report, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan publication that writes about education. What we joke internally that we cover diapers to degrees, early education all the way through graduate school. I'm so happy to be here today to talk about a subject I'm very interested in, which is how high schools are evolving, and especially in the age of AI. I'd love my panel to introduce themselves very briefly, and then we'll get started. Maria, please.
Hi, I'm Maria Flynn. I'm the president and CEO of Jobs for the Future. We're a national nonprofit that works to drive economic advancement for all. It's great to be here.
Good afternoon, Tim Knowles, Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. Stakes in the ground for two things. One is the transformation of the American high school, and the second is to make the post-secondary sector a more vital engine of economic opportunity.
Good afternoon, Jacob Oliva, Secretary of Education for the greatest state in the nation, Arkansas.
Theo, Wold, Senior Counselor at Palantir.
Great. Well, let's get started. Secretary McMahon referenced some of this in her remarks earlier today about how high school is kind of coming full circle. She was talking about career education back in her day. And I'd love to start with you, actually, Secretary Oliva, to
Sure.
really make this feel concrete, some of the changes that you've been making in Arkansas. At Hechinger, we've written about how Alabama has a new diploma starting this year, a workforce diploma that changes some of the makeup of what students are taking in their high school coursework. Indiana, Katie Jenner was here obviously earlier today. They've done a lot of changes to the types of diplomas that high school students can earn. Tell us what's going on in Arkansas.
Sure.
Since you've been there.
So thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. And I think it's kind of interesting because Secretary McMahon talked about, she remembered when she was in school, and anybody that's worked in education knows that pendulum tends to swing back and forth, right? So we've been having similar conversations around the reality that we know that every student isn't on a highway to university. And we have to create systems that have exit ramps and on ramps with the goal of making sure we have lifelong learning and that every pathway leads to prosperity. So we have a mission that we want every student to graduate from high school, meeting one of the 3 E's. Are they ready to be enlisted, enrolled, or employed? And it's a very simple mindset, and then all of our work goes towards that. So we've done some high school redesign as well, looking at different diploma designations and pathways, because we like to say that not every student should be on a pathway to university, that we need to recognize CTE programs and give them just as much attention, but do we really? So we worked on a big legislature with Governor Sanders on a bill called Arkansas Access, where we just blew up the entire CTE pathway and pipeline and actually codified in policy and in law that this is going to be just as equally rigorous. Because we'll say that CTE is important, and we've created these career clusters and high lists and high demands, and every school has to have 3 career pathways, and one of them has to be off that list, and everybody's doing all that work. But then we say weighted credits only for AP, IB, right? Why isn't the rigorous coursework in CTE weighted and and being considered just as rigorous? So part of our challenges is we recognize some kids are going to earn a standard diploma. We developed a diploma of merit for kids that may earn an earnest certification. Maybe they take some AP courses, some concurrent courses, and then a diploma of distinction for kids that earn their AA, get a workforce experience on our high skill, high demand, follow a military readiness pathway and enlist. And those distinctions are going to come from the state. Then we also use that to define what we consider a success-ready student. And that cell of percentage of students graduating from high school is in part of your school grade. So schools are going to be held accountable for the number of students that are earning merit and distinction pathways. We're updating our funding formula now to give districts more weighted funding for those students. And then we tied all of our state scholarships that students can receive to those designations. So if you earn a diploma of distinction, you automatically qualify for the top tier Governor's Scholarship with direct admission into any state university college that you want. But the biggest thing that we did is we told the state that these courses matter, they're rigorous, and put them on the same weighted scale, because kids are competitive, same weighted scale as our university prep programs, because that's how much we value them. And if you're going to say these programs are important, then your actions need to do that. And that's why I always say, and I ask schools, could your next valedictorian be somebody that completed a career and tech ed program? And if the answer is no, then do you really have that conversation about that this pathway matters.
That seems like it was a massive undertaking. I don't know.
It's
if
like a 3-minute
yeah.
overview. So I know it's only a 45-minute panel. There's other people here.
But my question, I guess, would be then for Theo and Maria. High schools are clearly changing. Is it enough for the workforce? That kind of transformation sounds pretty significant, but does that cut it? I guess.
Yeah, Theo, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I guess to offer like the contrarian take up front, I mean, it would be essentially that I think institutionalized education, as we know it, is dead. And it's been dead for a while, in part because we're still working within the same framework. An overemphasis on specialization and in part an overemphasis on the pathway to college. And I think the disjunction that we see in the workforce is both an inability to develop talent early on and an inability for unconventional learners to manifest their own individual genius. And so it's to say a little bit more, what I mean by that is, I think at Palantir, so we've started 2 programs, one which we're calling the Meritocracy Fellowship. And I think the easy one sentence explanation of that is for young, prodigiously talented young people to pursue an immediate entry into the workforce rather than go to college. But unlike a lot of those other sort of gimmicks that exist out there to avoid the trap of college, we're emphasizing an educational component at the same time. Mm-hmm. So an education in first principles, in sort of the formative material that makes a builder not only a skilled builder in their vocation, but also a good citizen. The other fellowship pipeline we've created is something we're calling the American Tech Fellowship, which is this recognition that there are all kinds of talented workers in the American workforce already who, because of the failures of the education system, have been tracked out into positions that do not make use of their genius. So individuals who, either because they came from places like where I'm from, an incredibly poor working class community in California, some of the highest stagnant unemployment and some of the worst test scores in the country. Either they grew up in a place like that, or they had the absence of educational rigor in their core curricula in high school. So getting those people who are talented, who can make demonstrable contributions to the American economy and also our national security defense apparatus, and getting them out of menial positions where their genius is not tapped into, and producing an opportunity, whether it's at the start of their career or mid-career. So our view at Palantir, I think, is the educational model that we have. We can deploy whatever jargon we want of the moment, but whether it's enhance critical thinking skills or improve access. But the problem with institutionalized education is that it's really failed to identify the talent and really, as we say at Palantir, develop the discernment of individual learners to then become workers and hopefully someday become citizen builders.
So I may not be that contrarian, but maybe a little bit. So I think that the reforms that are happening in high schools in places like Arkansas and Indiana, we heard from Secretary Jenner earlier, are like huge steps in the right direction. And I just think that we need more states and more communities to be moving in that direction. So I think to me, it's kind of early days. And I think ideally, rather than this being a pendulum that swings back and forth, that we kind of really grasp onto the idea as a nation that we need both and, right? We need high academic rigor, and we need every student to be prepared for a quality job. And I think kind of getting beyond the either or debate is critically important. And I think especially as we start to look at the impact that AI is starting to have and is going to increasingly have on the labor market, particularly entry-level jobs. So I think steps that we can be taking now, to me, one is like truly ensuring that every student has access to high-quality work-based learning opportunities, starting in high school, and really enabling that to happen at scale. We recently released our kind of work-based learning framework 2.0. That's on the JFI website if folks want to check that out. And then second is, really working to truly develop a career navigation system that can help young people and their families make good choices around what comes after high school. So we recently released a survey that we did with Gallup that surveyed both Gen Z learners and their families. And I think it was only about 38% or so of young people felt that they have like a good idea of what they want to do after high school. And the percentage of parents who felt equipped to help their child make those decisions was only about 53%. So we need good navigational supports that don't only focus on the four-year schools, but really look at all of the high quality options that are out there, including apprenticeship, including kind of the work first models that you're mentioning, and really can look at the full landscape of options.
Just to follow up on that, and Theo, you touched on this a little bit, but finding these students and then shaping them, where the employer is actually the engine of developing the talent, as opposed to them coming to you like 100% ready to work. Is that happening? It seems like we're talking so much about the education system changing or evolving, but in your case, it sounds like the employer is kind of taking the bull by the horns, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think in part that's attributable to the fact that institutionalized education has failed in this regard. So rather than expect it to produce something different, then we're going to go and create the model that will produce a different kind of learner, again, but also worker. I also think, look, one of the sort of the dynamic sort of motivators here is AI, that will have this demonstrable impact on the workforce. But I think there's room for AI optimism, and especially in the educational space. So a lot of people coming out of COVID experienced for the first time, whether by choice or because there was no other alternative with lockdowns of educational institutions, like the homeschooling experience. And just in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been this growth of technological applications that allow homeschooling co-ops, classical Christian models of educational pedagogy that are not hard science oriented, to really develop this kind of curricula almost on their own. So I'm thinking something like synthesis math. It's an incredible leveler. I mean, you used to have to be from a well-to-do family to afford a skilled tutor in calculus. Now with AI, anyone really can have that at-home supplement. So, and the point being here that I think there's a lot of maneuverability so long as educational institutions don't block that kind of growth or those opportunities for young people in particular. And one last thing I'll say is just a lot of the disjunction that's occurring in the workforce is at the point of hiring.
Okay.
American young people actually did follow the advice. They really did. They went into STEM and they've excelled in STEM. They have excelled by all sort of international testing metrics. The young people who pursue advanced degrees, in particular in mathematics or engineering or computer science, are doing better than their peer competitors, but they're just not seeing the end results, getting hired. And I think that creates a difficult value proposition, especially for working class families in this country. Why go and get the 4-year college degree if it's not going to lead to a job anyway?
To follow up on that, you're helping me with my transition here. So for students like that, or for, we talk about Gen Z as a monolith, they're not a monolith, but we talk about, the workplace having to accommodate them or mold to them. Is that just a zero-sum game? Is that the wrong question? Is it that the opportunities are just not there? I mean, how do we build this workforce of tomorrow if students are doing everything right?
Whose question?
Anyone who'd like to answer that one.
So I think to piggyback on the point about those pathways to prosperity, having conversations at an earlier age. I actually think high school is too late to start having those conversations, because I used to be a high school principal at one point in my career, and I remember every year we would do a thing called freshman orientation night, and all the different clubs and different programs would set up these tables, and all the freshman families would come in about a week before school starts to figure out what they wanted to be a part of. And the amount of families and kids that I would talk to that had no idea where they wanted to be in 4 years, and 4 short years, was incredible. And that's why we're looking at career pathway and exploration early at middle schools. But to some of the point that people are making is people have lost faith in higher ed right? Like there needs to be we talk about reforming and reshaping high schools, and I think this is something we can work with Secretary McMahon and look at how loans work, but funding loans for non-degree workforce credentials should be a big deal. And there's a lot of people that can start their pathway to prosperity at short-term credentialing program that really isn't recognized. So like higher ed will say, well, you need to get an AS degree so that you can get a loan, and then still have to take 2 maths, 2 Englishes, 2 humanities, and you're becoming a boat builder. Well, any of those programs will tell you, and then their funding models are based on degree completions. They'll say, once a kid learns fiberglass 1, 2, and 3, they go to work. I can't get them to finish an AS degree, but the only way I can get them into the school and get them funded for those courses on a Pell Grant is if they're in an AS program. So I think there's just a lot of opportunity around that. But empowering families and being honest, we're in the middle of doing a return on investment study, which sounds like something that would be easy to do. Like, is it worth going to college, right? Like, that's a pretty simple question. So we did a 10-year snapshot of a cohort of students that graduated from a college degree program in Arkansas, tracked them back 10 years, modeled out if you just made an average high school diploma, an average earner made this much, it took you this many years to get a 4-year degree and this much money, how long does it take for that degree to pay off, right? Shockingly, some degrees, like, I don't know, physics pays for itself in like a year and a half. Like, these folks 10 years later are doing very well. And I probably don't need to tell you about a lot of the different degree programs that never pay for itself. Like, they will never catch up. We literally wasted people's years of their lives. They threw away thousands of money, and that degree in gender studies does nothing. Right? So why were we paying for that as a state? I don't know. And those are some of the questions that we're starting to have, because there's no value in that.
Yeah, and I think that's the trend that we are seeing is more studies like that. And I think we need to be able to give that type of information to young people and their families in very actionable ways. So I think that's critically important. And I also totally agree with the emphasis on, and this opportunity that Workforce Pell is finally going to bring for the field to actually be bringing Pell dollars to some of those high quality short-term credentials as well. But I also think, like, to your point, like on the demand side, I think there's also a need for employers to be rethinking their hiring models, right? So like, what jobs really, really need that college degree and which don't. So I think this is a issue where we need both the supply and the demand side of the equations to shift.
Were you going to say something?
I was just going to say really quickly, I mean, I think it's an interesting point, a time for evaluation because of the likely displacements that AI may cause, especially when you're looking at, some courses of study do not produce value for the individual already, right? And I think as far as those conversations occurring earlier in an individual learner's life, yes. And this is rooted in our tradition. There's this great passage in Book 2 of Democracy in America where Tocqueville talks about on the genius of American commercialism. And he says the brilliance of the American individual is that they're willing to take risks. They do difficult things. They have an adventurous spirit, and it may not work. It may not produce instantaneous value for them, but they try again, and then they try again. And if you look at institutionalized education right now, we do the exact opposite. There is no time to take risks. Standardized testing metrics have to be hit. You have to score so high on your GPA or in your AP classes in order to earn that spot in an incredibly competitive market for college placement. So at the very period of a young person's life when they should be most open to taking risks and to trying new ideas in the marketplace, we've actually conduced them to be risk averse. And so I think if you want a nation of builders, people who are willing to try new ideas and to implement on their own entrepreneurial spirit, you've got to break that sort of philosophical obstacle.
I would add that, to go back to your initial contention about the failure of institutionalized education, that we've largely built an educational system based on inputs. And my organization is responsible for one of those. It's called the Carnegie unit. We may talk about it, but it's the course credit. But it is fundamentally saying this amount of time equals learning. Higher education has been addicted to inputs for some time. so one of the rivers that has to run through this conversation, as you're suggesting, is how do we build an education sector, K-12 and higher ed, that is actually very explicitly focused on outcomes, on student success. And we're at a point in history and in time where I think that there's an opportunity to do that, and that will shift rapidly. It'll shift the sector.
However a young person is developing, in whatever path they take, whether it is college or not, I think you would all agree that there's some skills that they would need, durable skills: communication, teamwork, problem solving, stick-to-itiveness, persistence, taking risks. Can we embed that in the high school experience? Can we build it into the workplace once they're there? How do you develop those skills? Dr. Knowles, if you want to follow up on that.
Sure. So skills have had many names, and we've been knowing that these skills needed to be fostered for generations. They were soft. They were 21st century until the 21st century came. There was a moment they were non-cognitive, which I thought was hilarious, because even an itch is cognitive. Now they're durable, I think, or transferable. But so a couple things on these skills. Yes, empirically we know they matter enormously. Like, there's very strong evidence that not only do employers want these skills in our young people, but if they have them, they lead to all kinds of interesting and productive outcomes in the workplace, in post-secondary school, in civic life. So, check. We haven't built an educational system that actually attends to them in a very coherent way. And I mean by that, we need to broaden the aperture in terms of what school is for. If school is for developing these skills, don't just use learning English or history or math as the proxy, singularly. And this is not an argument for dispensing with algebra. I like algebra. But we have to get much, much more explicit about embedding the development of these skills that we know predict good things in the DNA and the architecture, the learning experiences of the schoolhouse. Failing that, we run the risk of trying to force this institutional thing we call K-12 and post-secondary to do a very different set of things for a very different future. And I think that is a peril. Final point I'll say is we have to get smarter about identifying who has these skills. Mm-hmm. And if you think about a kid who's growing up in rural Idaho, who works on the family farm for 2 hours before they get to school, they're getting B's or better, they're there 98% of the time, they're doing all their homework, and they have a job after school. Tell me on aggregate that those aren't really powerful signals of persistence or work ethic, whatever you want to call it. That data exists. Those data exist. We need to leverage and surface those data, and then we can tap into extraordinary talent that's sitting really in front of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with all of that, and especially the fact that like the durable skills that we talk about and that you listed. If you look closely, they're the same skills that have been on every list, probably for at least 35 years or more, right? Yet I feel as a field, folks still spend too much time thinking about what skills should be on this list, right? You see it like in Forbes, whatever, all the time. Here are the top 10 skills. Well, they're the same skills, folks, and they've had them for quite a while. And so I think really as a field, how do we shift the emphasis to, as Tim was saying, like how do these skills get taught? How do they get assessed? How, like, when they are showing up in a young person's like school day, like I have a middle school kid and I have a kid in college. I notice like no one is like showing them, okay, oh, you have a hard time like cooperating with your partner on the science fair. Like no one's like kind of explaining like, well, you need to like learn how to work as a team and how to collaborate. So I think there are even easy ways where we can start connecting these dots for young people. But we need to move quickly to like really embed it more in the work that's being done. And then I think to Tim's example, I think on the employer side, we also as employers need to be able to identify, oh, like Maria has like skills like X, Y, and Z, well, then we can upgrade her to this like next role in order to advance her career. So really looking at skills also, not only at the point of hire, but as an advancement mechanism within the workplace as well.
I think if I was to add to that as well, generationally, I think it's interesting when you listen to teachers and parents about students today, because like when I was a kid and wanted to play with my friends, I actually went to their house and like had to play with them, right? Like, so the internet, screen time, gaming has changed interactions, and then workforce is saying kids don't know how to talk to each other, they don't know how to get along. Well, we've been putting them in front of computers, telling them that this is the way to do that, and maybe not modeling expectations or teaching the right skills. But I always say, like, is there a place for this in schools? Yeah. Where do kids learn or have the most opportunity to work in a group, to problem solve, to critically think? It's on the band field. It's in the locker room. It's putting on a play, right? Like, all of those things are developing those skills. We may not grade it. It may not be like a scripted lesson, but those are the first things we cut when budgets aren't where they need to be and test scores aren't where they are. Like, take away the after school play. You got to do more tutoring, right? Like, every one of those kids that are connected to a program has a mentor. We talk about mentors for kids. A football coach is probably the greatest mentor that most kids are going to get. You're going to find football coaches are picking kids up on the weekend, feeding them, doing whatever they can, and making sure that they know their role as a team. If you don't do your block, this person can't achieve their goal. You will let the team down if you don't do your job. That's important for employers to know, like in kids, where I think we have opportunity for a disconnect is the kids that worry me are not connected to anything at school. Okay. They literally just show up, go through their daily routine and go home, and they're not connected to programs. So I used to say all the time, like, because we love to have great smart rules in schools. Like I told you, I was a principal superintendent, so I was part of the problem. But it's like, oh, you don't have a 2.0, you're not allowed to play sports. I want to be like, you don't have a 2.0, you have to now play sports, right? Like, you are now in ROTC and you are in this, so congratulations. Like, we've got to flip that conversation because they're not connected, and that's how we can get them to understand their opportunity they have before them.
Theo, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I would just say really quickly, last 30 years, Ms. Flynn, you said maybe we've been having this conversation with Jacques Barzon, writes Teacher in America in 1944, and he's talking about soft skill development, communication, critical thinking. So, we've been on this train for a long time. And if I could, I would just offer, having worked in government for a long time, and you'll forgive me if it's a theological sort of connotation, but there's a missing teleology to educational institutions currently, which is, what are you educating the young person for? And even though I'm here sort of representing the private sector, it's not to create a labor widget for the economy. In our form of government, you are educating a young person to be a citizen. And it turns out, in this moment of great sort of national political division that we're in, that these soft skills, communication, deliberation, the ability to collaborate with others, the ability to think openly about divergent or difficult ideas, all those turn out to be the preconditions to being a good citizen. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the components that we see Palantir is missing from institutionalized education, is not just producing good workers, but producing good citizens. And if you recall, I've said many times now, we're looking to create citizen builders, people who are able to participate in this great experiment of democracy and also build enduring ideas. And I think that's a point that we're missing in institutionalized education that really could be the cardinal direction point.
You had touched on this earlier about access and how now, with emerging technology, a student who is perhaps in a rural place could, or without means, could have a high-powered, sophisticated calculus tutor. And Dr. Oliva, I'd love to, or Secretary Oliva, I'd like to ask you, how Arkansas has made quite a bit of strides in how it's delivering the high school experience, but how do you make sure that it does apply to all students, for that untapped genius that Theo was talking about earlier, the undiscovered talent, and making sure that it's really accessible to all?
I think that's a great question, and that goes back to, you have to be really deliberate and have honest conversations, because you don't want to create a system where your zip code drives your destination, right? Like regardless of where we have some very small rural parts of the state, school districts with 300 students in it. Are we giving those students the same opportunity in a school district that has 20,000 students? And sometimes a school district can't do it all on your own. That's why we're working together to collaborate and credential. But with the advent of technology, whether it's through AI or virtual learning, we can provide that experience. It oftentimes, like we would create our own roadblocks, and these are the things where we got to push, like for our higher ed institutions, because we have a very deliberate challenge, and I say this all the time because I will talk to people like in small rural parts of the state, and they would say the same thing, but you don't understand, you don't know where our kids come from, you don't know their background. I know we can love our students into mediocrity, right? And if we raise the expectation, our kids not only will meet them, they'll exceed them, and we're gonna make sure they have access to everything that they deserve. And a lot of times, like we have these just crazy rules that I don't understand, whether it's through the higher ed institutions or K-12, but like we'll say like, okay, I want to teach a college algebra class in a high school with a math teacher that's certified to teach high school math. But the college will say, well, you don't have 36 hours past the content masters, whatever, so you're not certified to teach math. But you can teach AP calculus, right? I can't teach college algebra, but that same, like, how are we credentialing these people? And we have to blow it all up. Can the teacher teach the content? Then let's credential them so that these kids don't lose out on those opportunities, because we can make this happen.
Dr. Knowles, you talked about the Carnegie unit a few minutes ago. Maybe you can explain that a little bit better and talk about, is blowing up the Carnegie unit a way to go to
On the hot seat now.
Talk about a softball.
Yeah.
I mean, so just by Carnegie unit is the credit hour. Literally in 1906, the Carnegie Foundation, for which I'm responsible, said, for example, a college degree should be 120 credits. Today, it's 120 credits. In spite of what we've learned about learning from all kinds of interesting scientists, in spite of the fact that we know young people learn at extraordinarily different rates, depending on the individual and the subject of study, we've built an architecture, to your institution, we built an architecture that it's like the bedrock currency of the educational economy, this idea that time and learning is conflated. So that's a problem. Like we've also known that there are, people call it mastery, people call it competency. We've had versions of that since Dewey and Montessori. Like we've had the examples. What we haven't had is an educational architecture that enables competency to spread and scale and actually manifest. We've just had these little, gleaming examples. So yeah, if we're serious about transforming the educational machinery, we need to tackle the fact that we've built it around a unit of time, not around what people know, their skills, and their core knowledge. That does require a certain level of explosiveness, because it's infiltrated everything. It's how we define, it's who gets financial aid. It's what goes on a transcript. It's the daily work. It's why bells ring between classes. It's what we assess. It's what we teach. It's become the sort of bedrock. So yeah. And are there two quick other points? There's an extraordinary. I don't know if you've all probably heard of these portraits of a graduate. This is a pandemic unto itself, with people, schools and systems and states developing these portraits, saying, what do we want our schools to produce? And we looked at all of them nationwide, and we basically, rural, urban, red, blue, purple, all of it. And it turns out that American families basically want the same things. For the core purpose of school is manifest in these documents, which is probably their only utility, of stakeholders saying, this is what we want our young people to be upon completion of this thing we call school. Huge opportunity there. There's extraordinary alignment, and the communities, business, parents, students, educators have aligned around things that we know predict success. So they are around these skills that we're talking about. And yet we have built an institution that is really directly undercutting our efforts to build those kinds of skills. So if we can't bring these two, now there's we heard this morning, there's beautiful examples everywhere. I'm going to give one other. In eastern Indiana, we're working with Katie and superintendents across Indiana. There's a district called Eastern Hancock, which is doing incredibly elegant things in rural Indiana. The superintendent, George, just got approval to run 100 microschools across the state. Like, that's an interesting interruptive opportunity to bring a different kind of education, a one-room schoolhouse in some ways, to rural Indiana at broad scale. So I think those are the kinds of things we need to be looking for.
It sounds like Palantir has adapted to finding talent that may not have gone through a traditional, way of thinking, the four-year college, et cetera. But President Flynn, for you, is the rest of the workplace ready? I mean, we look at that resume and it's where did you go to school and what was your degree and what courses, and there's still people putting their GPAs on. I mean, what internship did you have if you were able to get one? So is the workplace ready for a radical change to the underpinnings of?
I think we're at an interesting point in that evolution, and I'm kind of curious and anxious to see what the next couple of years will bring. So I think over the past, say, 5-7 years, we have seen a good transformation among many employers to be open to removing degree requirements, looking more seriously at skills as kind of the currency for hiring and advancement. And I think the question is going to be, like, as if we're going to continue to see the labor market soften, is there still going to be openness to that on the part of employers at large scale? I would hope so, right? Because I do think that it is they're seeing the ROI of that. But I think we're at a moment where we have to kind of be watching it carefully. And but I think if you combine it with what we're hearing from Gen Z, again, not a monolithic point of view, but if young people are more open to these alternative paths, like really looking to see what are their quality options beyond the traditional four-year degree, and if employers are like increasingly becoming open to considering that, then I think we can end up in a great place. But we did a report a couple years ago with American Student Assistance called Degrees of Risk, because both sides were saying, like, boy, I'm really interested in that, but like I feel there's a risk involved. So I think we have to look at how are we de-risking these options on both sides.
Okay. We only have a few minutes left, so I have a lightning round question for all of you. Given the difficulty it can be and how hard it can be to move systems at scale, what is one change schools or employers could make within a year or faster that would be a game changer as AI reshapes the workplace and the workers of tomorrow? Something that can actually happen inside of a year, which is actually not that fast. But who would like to start?
I think you could change testing metrics, right? And I don't just mean on standardized testing. Things like the personal reflective essay or an analytical essay are now essentially nullities, right? You give homework and the kid goes home, uses ChatGPT and comes in with an essay that sounds like Jane Austen. So the test there of the retention of knowledge or the test of the skill is meaningless. So changing the way that teachers verify the obtainment of knowledge, as Dr. Knowles was saying, I think is extremely important. If I can, just really quickly, this happened before. You mentioned Madame Montessori. That was a reaction to a prior economic technological revolution, which is we need something less formulaic and more emphasis on mastery of material and craftsmanship. And that's the kind of thing we need to see inside of the classroom. Not architecture overall set by a state superintendent, but in the classroom.
I so am convinced that competency has to rule the day, that the actual demonstration of what you can do, what you've learned, however you've learned it, and that the mechanisms for learning are going to shift radically in the next 10 years. And the cost of providing that learning is also going to shift radically. That why not introduce a completely competency-based diploma in your state? next year. Figure out what the requirements are. But so you could learn anywhere, absolutely anywhere. Make it a high bar that's legible to both post-secondary and to employers. And I one other note, post-secondary institutions have been on an existential cliff for some time. They used to be an obstacle to getting some of the changes to K-12 because they said, no, we need this, and this, and this. That's been upended. And they're short on students. So the opportunity for K-12 to leverage the moment we're in and say, this is how we're going to do this, and this is what we are, is higher than it's ever been. So I would pay attention to that opportunity.
That's great. I would say within a year's time to truly expand work-based learning opportunities for all, whether that be through in-person opportunities, looking at some of the virtual platforms that are out there. But I think that as AI changes more and more, every student having opportunities like that is going to be more important. So really having folks graduate with some real-world work experience is going to be critical.
And I think from kind of that maybe K-12 perspective, throughout this year, we need to provide better support, guidance, and training for teachers on understanding how to use AI to not only make them maybe more deliberate with their practice and efficient, but then support students, because students are going to use it, right? Like, and AI is not new, right? I think generative AI is getting better and maybe creating a better product, but it's going to be in every classroom. And we've got to understand how to use that as a tool to help promote and expand on learning. I look at it like, I don't know, probably in the 60s, we'd argue, should a calculator be in a classroom in an engineering or drafting class? Like now you can't take a class without a TI-83, which still blows my mind that you still have to use a TI-83 in order to do college algebra, and it still costs the same amount of money. It's still $100 because I literally just bought one at the start of the school year.
I have a visual aid also of another breakthrough idea. To your point.
But I also think too that, and you alluded to it a little bit, there's an enrollment cliff coming, right? Or here, I think some of you said it's here. And universities and colleges need to work with industry and employers and reimagine what that experience looks like as we're preparing students for success on their pathways and journeys. So I would encourage, like as we're going through, we want to provide support for teachers in K-12, but we also really need to push our higher ed institutions to work with their industry partners, even regionally and locally, and demand to make sure that we're regaining confidence in higher ed, because we've lost a lot of confidence over the last few years.
There's no one from higher ed on this panel to say, can they do it in a year, though? Because that was my challenge was, can we do it inside of a year?
Just one quick
please.
note. Last year, Carnegie also classifies every higher ed institution in the country. So you've heard of Research 1 or R1 institutions. Instead, we do that. But we created an arms race for everybody wanting to climb up to the R1 status. We introduced a new classification last year focused on access and earnings. So very student success oriented, very outcomes focused. And we identified of 4,000 or so higher ed institutions, 478 that are doing extraordinary work. Some of them are usual suspects, but some of them are completely invisible, have been invisible, like Blackfoot Community College in Montana, Ball State, which develops lots of teachers in Indiana. The list is long, but I do think that higher ed focusing on those kinds of outcomes is an instrumental, and they could do that in a month.
Yep.
Excellent.
That's great.
Thank you all so much. What a great conversation.